very much. And I must say thank you to the South African Association of Asian Students. The association and the Russian Federation representing us there. And I have been listening quite closely to the discussions that have taken place since we've started, and I must be honest, I have no other words of wisdom other than that I agree with what is shared by my colleagues who came. Um, and yeah, I'm just when I looked at the topic, the two thematic areas at hand, I was a bit conflicted in terms of accepting this invitation. Uh, on one hand, I was quite excited to contribute both personally, professionally, to this conversation, but also um, at the on the other hand, I had a difficulty in accepting the invitation in the context of the current times that we are going through, not only as South Africa, the continent, Africa, but also I think the globe. Um, you know, let me just start by first saying, and I really must be honest, I prepared and everything, but I think after listening to the speaker within for me, I just thought it would be quite important to, just stick to the young people in this country, given the topic that we have today. The two complementary themes with regards to, South Africa's liberation rooted in Southern Africa's history. And I think for me, program director and the colleagues who are on the platform, who are joining us today in terms of this platform, is that we really are in an unprecedented time, not only in terms of our own country, but also in terms of, the region. If we are looking at the processes that are taking place with the SADC region, given the fact that South Africa is the current interim chairperson of the SADC region, given that Madagascar had said that we cannot hold the SADC chairman personship, given the fact that young people took to the street to revolt, right? In terms of the current government of that nation in South Africa, obviously after the G20 thing, that we are capable, but also even our compatriots and our comrades and our friends and our diplomats in the region saying we think that South Africa can handle this, given that they just were the chairperson of the G20. Um, but also at the same time, for me, program director and the colleagues who are on platform, I think this also speaks to some of the larger issues that are being experienced as well within the African, looking at the African Union, our three member states of the African Union, given the current challenges that the Pan African Parliament is experiencing. But also, we're also seeing that, SADC is trying to reimagine its role within the SADC role. What does it mean to be part of the SADC role? The 16 member states of SADC, your South Africa, Eswatini, Botswana, Lesotho, and so on. What does it mean for us, given our history, if we're looking at the history of the liberation movements in the southern region, from Swatini, from South Africa, Botswana, and so on, or the frontline states, that, as we used to call them, um, you know, uh, you, and their own sort of challenges, but also how do we make sense of that? Also holding in line what some of the scholars had positioned in terms of, whether from your Steve Biko's and all the scholars who had also talked about the fact that, you know, um, what would happen post democracy, what would happen post these nations experiencing the democracy, right? And some of them that would take foot, right? And that is why program director, I want to speak to the young people today to say that yes, you know, South Africa's liberation movement. I mean, yes, this coming Monday in our country, we'll be celebrating day, the day that in 1994, our people, whether white, black, whether you are Zulu, Tswana, Sotho, we felt those that our parents, our grandparents, they took to the streets to go vote. But what does it mean today when our young people are saying to us that yes, 32 years into democracy, or 30, yeah, plus minus 32 years into democracy, 30 decades, we cannot and we do not have contribution. What does it mean when our young people are saying that plus minus 3 decades into democracy, when the preamble of the constitution says we, the people of South Africa, united in our past and the injustice and so on, we do not feel we. What does that mean, right? And for me, I raised this program director because I think this is something that to grapple. What does it mean when the young people of today are saying to us that this constitution, South Africa's constitution, which is the supreme law of the land, the highest law in the land, where this current generation, who when we look at the 2024 national election, are saying to us, we are not going to turn out to vote because we do not identify with current level of the whether you're an independent candidate or political party, but secondly, we do not identify with this current constitution. What does it mean? And that is why I thought let me divert a bit from the topic of South Africa's freedom, um, you know, uh, rooted of liberation. Because I think all of us program director, we know very well the history of South Africa, democracy, apartheid, and, and many of our young people, whether you get through the education system or the private education, you know the history of, and even everyday lived experiences, you know the history of South Africa's democracy. And the meaning of the fact that this coming Monday we are celebrating plus minus 30 years into South Africa's signing of the constitution, the democracy, but also June 16 presents the 50th anniversary of June 16, the events that happened in 1976, but also even before that, the Shabro massacre and so on. But also this year, program director, in August of 2026, we'll be celebrating the 70th anniversary of what I call the mother or protest, when our grandmothers, our mothers, our aunts took to the streets in Pretoria in the Union buildings to say enough, right? So, program director, really, these interventions that I'm presenting, I should say, we are at an inflection point. And what that means is that the the current state, the state of affairs can no longer go right. The state of affairs cannot we cannot move as we have been in the plus minus 20 years, right? Young people are saying this is not it. What does it mean for us? And I think for me, program direct, I raised these interventions and I thought, let me move away from the traditional keynote speaker role of going through history, of saying, these are the inspirational moments, the 1994 moment, so on and so on. We know all of it. But what does it mean when now our young people are saying, enough is enough? We are the young people who are born after 1994. The current situation in the country, and of course, there are many intersections, right? And by intersections, I mean whether you are a woman, a young black woman, a young African, a young man, or whether you are an LGBTQI plus identifying person, but the current state of affairs is not working. What do we need to do to make it work, right? So program director, I'm raising, as as provocations, but also as meditations to say, currently, you guys are the young people right now who are holding this webinar in Russia. We know that Russia, the role that they have played, in supporting our fathers, our uncles, our mothers, our aunts in the liberation movement. What does, the current geopolitical ties look like given the current state of affairs? But also, what does that mean when our our young people, particularly in the country, but also perhaps maybe in the other continent, are looking inward in terms of policy formulation? Mm. What is it about us in the Southern African region where our young people are inward looking instead of outward looking in terms of the African continent? I mean, if we look at the research that's coming out of the AU that says that by 2050, 2063, Africa is the young population, and again, fact checked, but also, backed up by the evidence that is coming from, other sources, academic sources, some society sources that says, whilst the global north is growing old, in fact, we are growing young. What do we need to do, right? So I think for us, this moment and this webinar is not only timely, but it, it it is asking of us, how are we as young people of the continent, if we are going to be the youngest population in the continent, how are we going to be outward looking? And by outward looking, I mean, how are we going to collaborate, co-create, and co-initiate with our colleagues in the African continent, right? Because right now, President, as you know, you know, I mean, yes, from 2008, you know, the many migrant, illegal immigrant, and so on, the issues that have, you know, um, come to our country in South Africa. But how are we going to look beyond that? And what does a Pan African, Ujamaa, as it were, as the colleagues from Tanzania say, look that collective? Right. So, program director, I was hoping to be long, but I'm not going to be long, primarily because I thought, you know what, let me divert away, but also just listening and getting the wisdom from the colleagues who came before me. Let me move away from the traditional keynote speaker position and actually raise provocations as I've been listening and taking notes, and say, we are here, we are in this moment, we are in the South Africa, we are in this continent, we are in this geopolitical world that we're navigating. But to all the young people who are here, whether you are in South Africa, Botswana, Lesotho, Eswatini, Nigeria, Russia, wherever you are, what are we going to do about this moment? And let me leave it there, program director, because I think perhaps raising these provocations and these questions will be far more important in terms of my keynote and will be far more important in terms of the answer. Because I think we also need to look as the young people, whether in the continent or in the diaspora, to think about the solutions. Because I think oftentimes we think about the problem, but we don't often think about what co-creation looks like in terms of the solution. Perfect.